So in lesson 3, we're going to continue our study of conditionals by looking at something called the if-else block. So this will be similar to what we did yesterday, but it will be slightly different as the code represents a very specific type of situation. And similar to yesterday, our learning target is that we can use conditional statements in Python, and specifically we're going to focus on the if-else conditional. So to recap yesterday, this is what we discussed. We discussed just that simple, single decision-making conditional that says, if this Boolean statement is true, run these actions. And while this is great, if we just have one set of actions that need to occur, it's not great for every situation. And on the next slide, we're going to look at a situation that can be better modeled by using what's called an if-else conditional. So this is the grades program that we already wrote, and really, while this is functional code, it's really not the best. If you're noticing here, we have something where it's printing you passed, and something very similar where it's printing that you did not pass. So this is really an either-or situation. You either pass or you fail. And if we have an either-or situation, this is where our if-else conditional blocks are going to be a better choice. So if we have either-or, what we learn on the next slide, the code on the next slide, is our best option because it models a, if this happens, do this, otherwise, run this code instead. So if-else conditionals are used when we have what's called a two-way decision, and you can see that in this flowchart right here. It comes in, here is where our condition is. That's the condition that we're wondering, okay, is it true or is it false? And what an if-else condition does is if it's true, it'll run the true statements. And if it's false, it'll run a different set of statements. So it can do two different things depending on if the statement in the Boolean condition is true or false. And then afterwards, after one of those two blocks of code has been run, it then regroups and continues on in that sequential fashion. So here the big thing that you're noticing is that yes, we have this same if with its Boolean statement, the colon, and the statements. That looks just like what we did yesterday. But the difference that comes in is we're now pairing this if with its friend else. And so it's saying evaluate this condition. If this condition is true, run this code right here. All of these statements in this first if block. If this statement is false, you're going to skip those statements and instead you're going to come down to the else and you're going to run these statements here instead. So it allows you to have two different situations. If the statement is true, this is the true code. If the statement is false, you run this code instead. So notice that there's no conditional here next to the else. The else just runs if that first conditional up here is false. So if this conditional is true, it runs the code right beneath it. If it's false, it goes down to the else and runs that code instead. So similar to yesterday, I have another chunk of code that I want you to look at and decide, is this valid or is this not? So there are 4 chunks of code, and what I'd like you to do is pause the video, look at them, and in your notes, you'll see the same examples are typed there. Decide if these are valid or invalid, and if they're invalid, tell me what is wrong with them. So I was actually a little bit tricky here, and all of these segments of code are actually invalid for a variety of reasons. So in A, we're missing our colons, and we're actually missing 2 of them. One of them belongs after the Boolean statement that's paired with that if, and then there's actually a second colon that pairs with the else. So even though the else doesn't have its own statement in there, since it's paired with the if, it also has its own colon. Then down in letter B, we're missing the indents, so we want this to be indented and this to be indented to actually run inside of the if it's true, or the else if it's false. Up here, you can't have a Boolean statement next to an else. That's not the point. Yes, this is the opposite, so this says x is not equal to 60, and this says x is equal to 60. Yes, technically, that's what's happening. That's what's making this code down here run, but we don't state that. We just put else. else colon, that's implying I want it to be everything that doesn't meet that condition up by the if. And then this last one, if you notice here, there's this random statement that's not indented. The if and the else are connected. So until the else is done, everything between the if and the end of the else needs to be indented besides this statement and this statement here. So either the print test needs to be indented, or this code needs to be gone completely and moved down to beneath the else. So it can't be stuck right in the middle of the if and the else. It has to either be in one of those indented segments of code, or it needs to be down underneath where that block is finished running.